Chapter 1. Into the Unknown.
You no look good, Kofi. What happened?
Bamidil asked. The canopy overhead was so thick that it filtered the sunlight, casting an evergreen light over the jungle trimmings. The trees were tall and inspiring, their trunks covered in wettish moss and weepy vines. The air was blood-thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting vegetation. The ground was spongy underfoot, and the sound of water could be heard from nearby streams and rivers. Kofi and Bamidil walked through a dense jungle. Kofi wore a simple loincloth made from bark fibers, tied around his waist, and woven grass sandals on his feet. His quiver of arrows slung over his shoulder, and a bow made from a bamboo branch in his hand were ready to find prey. He also carried a handcrafted knife made from a local hardwood in his belt. Kofi started to feel unwell, sweating and panting heavily. Bamidil noticed the change in Kofi's demeanor, his face filled with concern. Kofi clutched his curly black hair and winced in pain.
I know now. I feel sick. My head it hurt,
he replied, his voice strained. Bamidil's broad face twisted in worry. He had been carrying a woven basket on his back filled with tools and supplies, but now it was set down on some mossy rocks.
Maybe a curse. The tribal priest with those we trade with, he no happy with our family.
Kofi continued, his strong jawline set, grateful for the older man's calm presence. Bamidil's graying eyebrows furrowed.
Curse? What you mean, curse?
Kofi's expression became even more serious.
The tribal priest with those we trade with, he say our family no pay enough to them. He put curse on our family. Make us all sick.
Bamidil's eyes squinted as if trying to discern something troubling.
No. That no can be true. No priest, he no have that kind of power.
He was a wise and experienced member of their tribe, with a deep understanding of the jungle and its ways. Kofi knew the others saw him as a trusted advisor to the leaders. He was respected for his wisdom and his ability to mediate disputes. It was said he had a strong connection with the spirits of the jungle. His necklace made of teeth and bone fragments round his neck, a symbol for this. Kofi became more insistent.
Look at me. I not well. It curse, I tell you.
His lean athletic build looked ever so slender as he fell to his knees, suddenly doubled over as forked teeth of pain stabbed across his stomach. His ordinarily bright face and brown eyes looked ever so much darker in the shade of the giant leaves above.
I no want to believe that. I see the priest. I see if it curse. I make our gods defeat their gods. Our gods are greater, yes?
Kofi was not so sure. As they talked, the atmosphere became more tense. The jungle, the wildwood of souls as they knew it, seemed to be reaching out to steal another soul, Kofi's. John's church, a plain and modern building on the outside, was located on a corner lot surrounded by a small patch of grass and a few trees. Inside, the church was warm and inviting. The walls were painted a neutral color and adorned with recessed lighting. The floor was made of polished concrete, and there were rows of slightly comfortable chairs facing a large projection screen at the front of the room. The sides were decorated with plants and natural light. The atmosphere was simple and uncluttered. As John arrived, he stood before the congregation and shared about his upcoming missionary journey, his excitement and his fear, his hopes and his doubts. You know, when I heard about the 1040th window, I felt a calling in my heart to go there and spread the good news, John said, his voice filled with passion. I've been reading the Bible, and I came across a verse in Matthew 24 verse 14 that says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." He continued, "It hit me that this is what Jesus is asking of us, to take the message of salvation to all nations. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to the places where the gospel hasn't been heard yet, where people are still in darkness, and I'm going to be a light. God is with me and He will guide me. I know that His end goal is to see as many people as possible to be saved, and that's my ultimate goal too." Members of the congregation listened attentively and with empathy. They knew that this journey would not be easy, but they also knew that it was essential. This is my calling, and I will do everything in my power to fulfill it, to bring the gospel to the unreached places and to be part of Jesus' return." He concluded, speaking with a determined look on his face. After his talk, the members of the congregation milled around him and laid their many hands on him, praying for him. As the congregation gathered around John, each prayed for him in their own way. One member, a middle-aged woman, prayed with a soft and steady voice, "Dear Lord, please watch over John as he goes on this journey. Please give him the strength and courage he needs to face the challenges ahead. Please protect him from harm and guide him in all things." Another member, a young man, prayed with a voice filled with urgency, "Lord, please be with John as he goes out to spread your word. Please give him the wisdom and discernment he needs to make the right decisions. Please give him the power to speak your word with boldness and conviction." An older gentleman, his voice quivering with emotion, said, "God, please bless John and protect him on his journey. Please give him the grace and the peace he needs to do your will. Please guide him and give him the strength to overcome all obstacles." Another member, a young woman, had a voice was filled with hope and love. "God, please be with John on this journey. Please give him the love and compassion he needs to reach the hearts of those he is going to meet. Please let him be a light in the darkness and bring hope to those who have lost it." As the prayers continued, John felt a sense of peace and comfort emanate from within his spirit. It quelled all the voices of self-condemnation, the hidden voices he never told anyone about. That divine love of fire was burning the chaff. They prayed for his safety, for his courage, for his strength, and for his faith. They prayed that he would be a light in the darkness, and that he would be able to bring hope and love to those who needed it most. They prayed that he would be able to see and hear God in all things, and that he would always be guided by the Spirit. The atmosphere in the room was filled with love and support, and John felt a sense of peace and belonging. John was at home, surrounded by piles of books, maps, and notes as he prepared for his trip. He was carefully going through his checklist, making sure he had everything he needed for the journey ahead. He had a backpack full of supplies, including a first aid kit, water purification tablets, and a camping stove. He also had a small satchel filled with Bibles, tracts, and other evangelistic materials that he planned to distribute on his trip. His older brother David was sitting across from him, looking over his shoulder as he went through his supplies. David was a rugged man, with a scruffy beard and a twinkle in his eye. He had always been fascinated by adventure and treasure hunting, and John knew that his brother had an ulterior motive for joining him on this trip. "You know I'm just looking out for my little brother," David said with a grin. "I can't let you go off into the jungle all by yourself." John smiled, knowing that his brother was not being entirely honest with him. "I know you're more interested in treasure," he said. David shrugged. "Can't blame a guy for trying. But honestly, I'll be happy if we find nothing but lost souls to bring to the Lord." John nodded, hoping his brother's priorities had changed over the years, and that he was now more interested in spiritual matters. Either way, he was glad to have David's company on the journey, and he knew that his brother would be a great asset to the team in terms of his wilderness survival skills. John and David arrived at the airport early in the morning. Both of them were carrying their bags and looking around for the correct check-in desk. They were greeted at the gate by a young woman. John smiled and said to her, "Nice to see you made it, Susan. This is my older brother, David." Susan introduced herself to David as a member of the mission team. "Hi, I'm Susan," she said, extending her hand. As Susan introduced herself to David, he couldn't help but notice her sparkling blue eyes and her warm smile. He felt an immediate attraction to her, and he found himself drawn to her energy and her enthusiasm. He couldn't take his eyes off her as she spoke about her background and her interest in joining the mission team. For her part, Susan also felt a spark as soon as she met David. She noticed his rugged good looks and his adventurous spirit. She felt a connection to him as he spoke about his own passion for exploring the unknown. She felt her heart flutter as their eyes met and held. "Susan is going to be working to become a translator for us," John explained. She's naturally gifted in communication patterns. She can effortlessly learn foreign languages and she will be a great asset. David nodded. That's great to hear. It would be a plus to have someone who could even figure out how to speak a local language which nobody in the civilized world knew. Susan smiled. I'm excited to be a part of the team and help out. I've prepared by learning some nearby dialects. As they walked and talked together, they found themselves laughing and joking easily. They discovered that they shared a love of adventure and a desire to experience a different world. They felt a natural chemistry between them, and both of them couldn't help but feel that they were meant to be together, and both of them knew that they would be seeing more of each other on the journey ahead. As they made their way to the gate, John couldn't help but notice. He smiled to himself. The Wildwood of Souls was a dense and mysterious forest located in the delta of a great river. It spanned across a large area and was home to a diverse range of plant and animal species. The forest was known for its unique ecosystem and the intricate network of waterways that ran through it. The dense canopy overhead sieved the sunlight and continued to create a dim and eerie atmosphere. The Karamunga tribe believed that the forest was haunted by spirits, and they had many legends and stories about the mysterious creatures that were said to inhabit the area. The forest was also home to many tapirs revered by the tribe's people as sacred creatures. They believed tapirs possessed spiritual powers. The Wildwood of Souls was a place of great natural beauty and spiritual significance, and held a special place in the hearts and minds of the Karamunga tribe. Bamadil was determined to get Kofi back home, even though his friend was clearly very sick. He knew that Kofi needed medical attention as soon as possible, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get him there. He helped Kofi to his feet, and they set off through the jungle.
Kofi no looked this bad before. I need get him help fast. It up to me. Breathe. Breathe. Focus.
As they walked, Kofi's condition worsened. He was sweating profusely and his breathing became more labored. Bamadil could see that his friend was in a lot of pain, and he knew that they needed to hurry. He supported Kofi as they walked, helping him over rough terrain and through thick underbrush.
One step. We got long way through jungle, but we make it. I believe.
Despite Bamadil's best efforts, Kofi's condition continued to worsen. His fever spiked, and he started to experience hallucinations. Bamadil did his best to keep Kofi on his feet and moving forward, but it was clear that the journey was taking a toll on him. Finally, after hours of walking, they arrived back at the village. Kofi was so weak that he could barely stand, and Bamadil had to carry him the last few steps to his hut. Once inside, Bamadil laid Kofi on his bed, and he saw that his friend was burning up with fever. He knew that Kofi was very ill and he needed to rest. He covered him with a blanket and sat by his side, trying to keep him cool with a damp cloth, and giving him water to drink. He knew that he could only wait and pray for his friend to recover, but deep in his heart, he feared that Kofi might not make it. As Kofi lay in his hut, his fever like a prey walking through fire. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, and his mind was filled with vivid hallucinations. In one of his delirious states, he saw a giant tapir standing at the foot of his bed.
What are you doing here?
Kofi muttered, his voice weak and raspy. The tapir seemed to be looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and compassion.
I am here to guide you,
it said in a deep and melodic voice.
Guide me where?
Kofi asked, confused.
to the other side.
The tapir replied.
You have been chosen to walk the path of the spirits, to join your ancestors and to find peace.
Kofi was bewildered. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. He had heard stories of the spirit realm, but he never thought he would experience it himself.
I don't understand,
he said, his voice barely audible. The tapir nodded.
You will understand in time. But for now, let go of your fears and doubts, trust in the journey and have faith.
With that, the tapir began to fade away, and Kofi closed his eyes. He knew he ought to feel a sense of peace and tranquility. But there was something sinister in the pit of his stomach. I don't want to die yet, he thought. He knew that he was in the hands of the spirits, but whatever happened, he had to fight to live another day. David, John, and Susan boarded the plane for their journey to the 1040th window. They were all feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as they settled into their seats. The plane ride was long, and David increasingly found himself daydreaming about the possibility of finding treasure. He knew that the mission was about spreading the gospel, but the thought of finding something valuable was hard to shake off. David was sitting next to Susan, and they were chatting, laughing, and getting to know each other better. Susan turned to David and said, "I'm so excited to be here. I've always been fascinated by different cultures and languages, and I can't wait to learn more about the people we'll be meeting." David smiled and nodded. "That's great to hear. I'm sure you'll be a plus to the team. What's your background?" Susan nodded. "I studied linguistics and anthropology, and I've always had a natural ability to pick up new languages. In fact, I can usually learn a new language within hours of hearing someone speak." David looked at her. "That's incredible. I wish I had that talent. I can barely speak one language." Susan laughed. "It's definitely come in handy on my travels. I've always been fascinated by the way different cultures communicate and express themselves. I'm looking forward to learning more about the local languages and customs during this trip." David nodded. "I'm sure you'll have a lot of interesting stories to tell when we get back home." Susan smiled. "I'm sure I will. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here and to make a difference in these communities. Susan, I know this trip is about spreading the word of God, but I can't help but wonder if there's any chance of finding something valuable while we're here. Have you heard any stories about valuable artifacts or treasures in the area we'll be visiting?" Susan looked at him with a curious expression. "I've heard some stories, but I haven't paid much attention to them. My main focus is on learning the local languages and cultures." She shrugged. "I can't guarantee you that we'll find anything." David nodded. "I understand, but I can't shake off this feeling that we might stumble upon something valuable. I guess I'll just have to wait and see what happens." Susan gave him a complicated smile. David nodded in apparent agreement. "You're right. I get off course. I'll keep my focus on the thing." John was sitting across the aisle, reading a book and taking notes. He was deep in thought, preparing himself mentally and spiritually for the journey ahead. He knew that the mission was going to be challenging, but he was also filled with a sense of purpose and a sense of peace. He knew that God was with him, and he had faith that everything would work out. As the plane landed, they all felt a sense of accomplishment, and they were ready to face whatever challenges that lay ahead. They knew that this trip would change their lives forever, and they were excited to embark on this new chapter together.